of somebody who is affluent, successful, everything in the West. And I understand, once I get over my arrogance of super race arrogance, that we have a great deal to learn about the dignity of the processes of life and death, and the way of understanding them in a way to release us rather than to torment us. I have to digress briefly to just share with you my own sequence of perceptual shift a little bit so that you can appreciate the kinds of things I want to talk to you about. For I was trained as a social scientist and was a professor. I was actually part of a junta at Harvard to protest against the soft and mushy conditions of the clinical social psychology department, social relations department. I was one of those guys in favor of harder statistics, kind of guys you love, right? I just felt that anybody that didn't know how to do a factor analysis and a chi-square just hadn't yet awakened. And though I played that game as hard as I knew how, for all the points I knew how to collect, there was in me, despite my psychoanalysis, a very gnawing uneasiness that I was missing something, a malaise. And when we experience a malaise in our culture, we tend to treat that malaise as if it is our fault. And we treat it as if it's our neurosis. And it's our lack of adaptability to the existing culture, which must be right because there's so many of them. And I kept trying to readapt my being to fit into the gratification patterns that the culture was offering me. And it just wasn't working. And I started to drink more, and I started to get more extreme in my ways of seeking pleasure in order to gain the kind of fulfillment to give me a feeling of well-being. Well, then I got for some years into experimentation with psychotropic chemicals, chemicals that alter consciousness. And that changed my head around a great deal. I saw through those experiments that perhaps my malaise, my discomfort, was not just my pathology, but it was a deeper something in me attempting to awaken. And that maybe instead of treating it as some sickness that ought to be treated as a problem, I should see it as something graceful, to be honored. And maybe it would be useful to allow my life to adapt, to tune to those feelings of wrongness or rightness within myself. And I did that, and I just let my life go in the course it would naturally take, responding to an inner intuitive sense of right, okay, that's all right. And it took me through, away from academia, it took me through psychedelic chemicals, it took me to India, it took me into yoga, and it brought me back to America, and it took me into a different kind of a perceptual view of the universe. And I found, much to my surprise, that through whatever had happened to me in these past 15 years, whatever had happened to me had very profoundly, in the real sense of alteration, had profoundly altered my feelings about death, and as a result, my feelings about life. It had very profoundly altered the definition of who I think I am. Now, I could try to very gently take you into the space translating, but instead of doing that, I'm going to do a much more shock treatment process. I'm just going to tell you how I see the world. And many of you will say, that is absolute rot. And that's perfectly okay. You have total license to reject it. But anything less than that would be dishonest on my part. So I'm going to go for broke. We'll let the chips fall where they will. Okay? And I'll even be more outrageous by telling you that what I'm presenting to you is not a belief system. It's the way things are. See, already your shackles are up. But what can I do? Anything less would be dishonest. I just got to play. You've got to know people like me exist. To the extent that I am anything at all, and that we can open for question in a little while, we could consider me as a separate entity, a set of predisposing characteristics. It would be like a DNA code, except we'll make it psychic instead of physical. I am a set of characteristics, a program that is manifesting by taking a human birth at this time. I have taken a birth into a body, and that body has with it a personality. I've taken a birth into a personality, and that personality is in a body. And I am going through a set of experiences which is called living life. And these experiences have a certain function. These experiences, if used consciously and intentionally by me, are vehicles through which I can awaken to who I am in truth. Let me take you through an example I often use, just another little metaphorical image and an analogy. Imagine, for example, that you have next to your eyes a little control switch, and you look at another human being on channel 1. And what you see when you look at the other human being is a physical body. Man, woman, old, young, fat, thin, pretty, handsome, ugly, interesting. If you're a scientist, you might call them mesomorphs, ectomorphs, and endomorphs. Okay? It's a matrix of individual differences on physical plane. It's the plane of standing on the corner watching all the girls go by. It's that reality. Now let's just say you're looking at another person and you flick your television receiver one channel. Now you look at another person and what you see is their psychology. Oh, you're a manic depressive. Oh, you're a happy person. I wish I was happy like you. People in psychotherapy live on this channel usually. They're totally preoccupied with their own depressions, elations, fears, anxieties, loneliness, hopes, etc. And that's reality. That's the real you. And the physical body is merely the carrier of that. Well, let's flip it again. Flip it again and you look at another person, and if you are so trained to be able to see on this channel, you would say, oh, I know who you are. You're a Libra. I can tell because of the... You're a Sagittarius. On this channel, on channel 3, there's only 12 beings in the universe and various permutations of them. Okay? You are now seeing what could be known as the astral identity of an individual. You're seeing another plane of reality. You're seeing another way of looking at individual differences. These are 3 ways of looking at individual differences, 3 matrices, if you will. But now you flip the dial once more. It starts to get interesting. Now if you flip the dial and look into another person's eyes, you flip the dial inside your own being and look into another person's eyes, what you see is another being